The relentless darkness was pierced by intermittent bursts of disorienting light as I lay sprawled on the cold, grimy ground. Every inch of my body screamed in protest, the sharp sting of injuries mingling with the dull ache of fatigue. My head felt like it was caught in a vice, each pulse sending waves of agony through my skull. My surroundings were a chaotic blur, an alleyway flanked by towering brick walls, their surfaces smeared with grime and graffiti. The flickering light of a distant street lamp cast unsettling shadows, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. I could barely distinguish the textures around me, the wetness of the pavement seeping through my clothes and the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. The pain was a harsh reminder of the nightmare I had unwittingly walked into, a brutal reckoning for my misplaced trust and love. As I lay there, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of the past hours, I felt an overwhelming sense of disorientation. The pain was more than physical. It was a gnawing, emotional wound, a reflection of my shattered marriage and the crushing weight of betrayal. The echoes of my wife Lisa's laughter, once a soothing balm, now reverberated with a cruel twist. I had followed her to that bar, driven by a mix of dread and a desperate need for answers. Her behavior had become increasingly erratic, late nights out, secretive phone calls, and a noticeable shift in her demeanor. The warmth in her eyes had turned to cold indifference, a stark contrast to the loving gaze I had cherished. That night, the bar had seemed like a sanctuary for Lisa and her new circle of friends, bikers whose rough appearance and boisterous behavior were alien to the refined social circles we once frequented. The place was alive with a raw, untamed energy that contrasted sharply with the sterile environment of our home. The clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation had faded into the background as I watched Lisa interact with these men. There was an intimacy in her gestures, a familiarity that struck me like a blow to the gut. Her laughter was too free, her touch too lingering. Each interaction was a knife twisting in my heart, the reality of her infidelity sinking in with a painful clarity. When I had confronted her, the scene had devolved into chaos. My accusations had sparked a volatile reaction, turning what should have been a dialogue into a violent confrontation. The bikers, initially mere spectators, had quickly become aggressors. Their faces, shadowed and menacing, had closed in on me, their strength overwhelming. The scuffle had escalated rapidly, a flurry of fists and shouts that left me battered and disoriented. The blows had come relentlessly, a physical manifestation of my emotional devastation. I had been powerless, unable to defend myself against the onslaught of rage and brutality. Now, lying in the alley, my body was a map of bruises and cuts, each mark a testament to the violence I had endured. My clothes were torn, stained with a mix of blood and grime, a grim reminder of the night's brutal events. As I tried to focus, to make sense of the agony and confusion, I realized the gravity of my situation. My life, once a picture of stability and love, had been turned upside down. Lisa's betrayal was not just a personal failure. It was a profound violation of the trust that had bound us together. The dreams we had built, the future we had envisioned, lay in ruins, scattered by the harsh winds of reality. I could not remain a passive victim, resigned to the pain and disillusionment. As I lay there, each breath a struggle, I knew I had to take control of my fate. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty and peril, but I was determined to confront the truth and seek retribution. The betrayal I had endured was a catalyst, propelling me into a fight for justice and self-preservation. The pain, both physical and emotional, was a crucible, forging a resolve within me that could not be extinguished. With every labored breath and every pounding heartbeat, I resolved to uncover the full extent of Lisa's treachery. I had to navigate this treacherous path, to seek out the answers that had eluded me, and to reclaim the shards of my shattered life. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger and confrontation, but I was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. The darkness of the alley was a metaphor for the challenges to come, and as I slowly gathered my strength, I vowed to emerge from it, not as a broken man, but as one ready to fight for justice and reclaim the life that had been so cruelly stolen from me. The dimly lit bar pulsated with an energy that was foreign to me, a stark contrast to the quiet, predictable evenings I had grown accustomed to. I had trailed Lisa discreetly, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Each step I took felt like a heavy burden, the weight of my suspicions and fears growing with every stride. As I peered through the smoky haze of the bar's entrance, my eyes struggled to adjust to the low light and the chaotic scene before me. The cacophony of laughter, clinking glasses, and raucous conversations formed a dissonant symphony that amplified my sense of foreboding. Lisa was at the center of it all, her presence strikingly out of place amidst the crowd of rough-hewn bikers. She was dressed in a way that was both alluring and incongruous, a tight-fitting leather jacket and high heels that seemed to elevate her, making her the center of attention in a world that was both alien and intimidating to me. Her hair, usually neatly styled, flowed freely, adding an air of unrestrained freedom to her appearance. I watched as she moved through the crowd with a confidence that was both captivating and unsettling. The way she interacted with the bikers was a stark contrast to the reserved, sophisticated woman I had known. The bikers, with their tattoos and scruffy beards, exuded an aura of rebelliousness and camaraderie. Their voices were loud and brash, their laughter echoing through the room with a raw, unfiltered quality. Lisa seemed to revel in their attention, her laughter mingling with theirs in a way that felt both intimate and provocative. She leaned in close to one of them, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture that was both casual and suggestive. The man responded with a grin, his eyes lingering on her with a predatory interest. It was a moment that felt charged with an unspoken tension, and I could sense the shift in Lisa's demeanor. Her interactions were no longer the reserved exchanges of our past, but were now imbued with a new, unsettling vitality. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. The bikers' rough jokes and boisterous behavior seemed to draw Lisa further into their world. She moved with an ease that spoke of familiarity, her laughter more unrestrained, her gestures more confident. I felt like an outsider, my presence a stark contrast to the ease with which Lisa navigated this environment. It was as if I was witnessing a side of her that had been concealed from me, a side that reveled in a raw, untamed freedom that was both thrilling and disturbing. The moment of truth came when Lisa's interaction with one of the bikers escalated into something more intimate. The man, a burly figure with a grizzled beard, placed his hand on Lisa's lower back, pulling her closer. Lisa responded with a flirtatious smile, her body language signaling a level of comfort that was deeply unsettling. My heart raced as I realized the implications of their interaction. The boundaries between them were blurred, and the familiarity they shared was a stark revelation of the nature of their relationship. My emotions were a turbulent mix of anger and despair as I observed their exchange. The realization that Lisa had been leading a double life, engaging in behaviors that were so diametrically opposed to the life we had built together, was a crushing blow. The facade of our seemingly perfect marriage was crumbling before my eyes, replaced by a harsh reality that I was now forced to confront. The disparity between the woman I thought I knew and the person I was witnessing was too vast to ignore. The situation reached a boiling point when I could no longer contain my frustration and hurt. I approached Lisa, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. Her reaction was immediate, a mixture of surprise and defensiveness. The confrontation quickly escalated, and the bikers, initially observers, soon became participants in a volatile exchange. Words turned into shouts, and shouts into physical altercations. I was caught in a maelstrom of violence, my attempts to reason with Lisa drowned out by the chaotic environment. The scene unfolded in a blur of violence and confusion. Fists flew, bodies collided, and the world seemed to spin around me. Lisa's face, once a symbol of love and trust, was now a mask of defiance and contempt. The bikers' aggression was unrelenting, and I found myself struggling to defend against their onslaught. My attempts to understand, to bridge the chasm between us, were met with hostility and physical aggression. As the confrontation subsided, I was left battered and disoriented, my body a canvas of bruises and cuts. Lisa stood amidst the chaos, her expression a mixture of anger and guilt, as if she was struggling with the consequences of her actions. The bar, once a backdrop for a casual evening, had become the arena for a painful confrontation that exposed the deep fissures in our relationship. Leaving the bar, the weight of the night's events settled heavily on my shoulders. The images of Lisa's interactions with the bikers, the violence that had erupted, and the realization of her betrayal were indelibly etched into my mind. The journey home was a solitary one, each mile a reminder of the shattered remnants of my marriage and the uncertain road that lay ahead. The stark contrast between the life I had envisioned and the harsh reality of Lisa's actions was a painful truth that I was now forced to grapple with. The bar's chaotic energy had reached a fever pitch by the time I decided to confront Lisa and her companion. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat like a war drum urging me forward. My fist clenched, and my jaw set in a grim line as I approached Lisa, who was now ensconced in a corner with the biker, the man I had seen flirting with her earlier. His bulk was imposing, his face a rough patchwork of scars and tattoos. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal fuel my steps, each stride a calculated move toward the truth that lay before me. The air was thick with the mingling smells of smoke, spilled beer, and the pungent tang of sweat. The cacophony of the bar, a blend of raucous laughter, clinking glasses, and loud music, created a discordant backdrop for the confrontation that was about to unfold. As I reached their table, I could see Lisa's eyes widen in surprise, quickly replaced by a flash of irritation. The biker, however, remained calm, his gaze locking onto mine with a cold, assessing look. "Lisa," I began, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "What's going on here?" Lisa's expression hardened, and she tried to dismiss me with a wave of her hand. "This is not the time or place," she snapped, her tone icy. Ignoring her attempt to brush me off, I directed my attention to the biker. "And you," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "What's your role in all this? What kind of man are you to get involved with my wife?" The biker's face remained impassive for a moment before a smirk slowly spread across his lips. "You're making a scene," he drawled, his voice low and menacing. "Maybe you should just back off before things get ugly." The dismissive tone only fueled my anger. I could feel my frustration boiling over, the betrayal cutting deep. I took a step closer, my voice rising. "I'm not going anywhere until I get some answers. What's going on between you and my wife?" Lisa's eyes darted between us, her anxiety palpable. "Please, just leave," she implored, her voice rising in pitch. "This isn't the time for this." Before I could respond, the biker stood up, his height and bulk creating an intimidating presence. "You really don't want to push this," he said, his voice now carrying an edge of threat. "You're way out of your depth here." My anger surged. I couldn't stand the sight of Lisa's complacency nor the biker's arrogant demeanor. I lunged forward, my frustration and desperation overcoming my better judgment. The biker responded swiftly, his reaction a mix of practiced aggression and brute force. He grabbed me by the collar, shoving me back with a strength that took me by surprise. I stumbled, trying to regain my balance, but the bar's chaotic atmosphere seemed to conspire against me. The first punch landed hard on my jaw, sending a sharp burst of pain through my head. I barely had time to react before another blow landed on my ribs, causing me to gasp for breath. The biker's attacks were relentless, each strike calculated to inflict maximum damage. The surrounding crowd seemed to close in, their shouts and cheers blending into a disorienting roar. Lisa stood at a distance, her face a mix of shock and guilt. She tried to intervene, but the sheer intensity of the confrontation kept her at bay. The biker's blows continued to rain down, his taunts punctuating each hit. "Is this what you wanted?" he sneered, his voice barely audible over the din of the bar. "To make a scene and get yourself hurt?" My attempts to fight back were futile against his brute strength and the overwhelming force of the blows. Each punch left me reeling, my vision blurring as the pain intensified. I could feel blood trickling down my face, the metallic taste in my mouth a stark reminder of the violence being inflicted upon me. The altercation seemed to stretch on endlessly, my sense of time warped by the pain and confusion. My body was beginning to give in to exhaustion, my limbs growing heavy and unresponsive. I could hear Lisa's frantic pleas and the distant shouts of onlookers, but they seemed muffled, as if I was sinking into a fog of pain. Eventually, the biker's aggression began to wane, his initial fury giving way to a grim satisfaction. He shoved me away with a final dismissive gesture. "I think you've had enough," he growled, his voice cold and final. I collapsed onto the floor, my body unable to withstand any more of the brutal assault. The pain was overwhelming, and I struggled to focus through the haze of agony. The bar's atmosphere, once vibrant and chaotic, now seemed distant and unreal. My vision swam, and I could barely make out Lisa's figure as she hurried towards me, her face etched with a mix of remorse and frustration. The biker, now seemingly content with the damage he had inflicted, turned his attention back to Lisa, leaving me in a crumpled heap on the floor. The crowd's noise seemed to fade into the background as I lay there, my body battered and my spirit crushed. The confrontation had left me not only physically wounded, but emotionally shattered. The brutal reality of Lisa's betrayal laid bare before me in the most violent of ways. As I lay there, struggling to breathe and feeling the weight of my injuries, I knew that the night had irrevocably changed me. The confrontation had exposed the deep fractures in my marriage, and the physical pain I was enduring was a cruel reflection of the emotional devastation I felt. The road ahead was uncertain, but the violence and betrayal I had just experienced were a stark reminder of the harsh reality I now had to confront. Lying on the cold, unforgiving ground of the bar's dimly lit alley, the throbbing pain in my body was a constant reminder of the brutal confrontation I had just endured. The chaos of the fight had finally subsided, leaving me battered and barely conscious. With the last vestiges of my strength, I managed to drag myself away from the scene, slipping through the back exit and into the darkness of the alley. Each step was a struggle, my body protesting with every movement, but I knew I couldn't afford to collapse here. My mind was a whirlwind of pain and determination as I plotted my next move. The escape was not just a physical feat, but a mental battle. I had to stay focused, pushing through the agony to find safety and gather my thoughts. I staggered to my car, each motion a testament to my resolve. Once inside, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking from the ordeal. The drive was a blur of red lights and muted pain, my focus solely on the goal that lay ahead: retaliation. Back at my place, I carefully planned my next steps. The initial wave of pain began to recede, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. I knew I needed to strike back with precision and strategy. The bar, where the confrontation had erupted, had to be the stage for my act of vengeance. It was not just about retribution. It was about making a statement, asserting control in the chaotic aftermath of betrayal. The plan was meticulous. I gathered everything I needed, a few carefully chosen tools, and a determined mindset. The night was still young, and the bar would be reopening soon, filled with patrons who had witnessed or heard about the earlier commotion. My goal was clear: to hit them where it would hurt the most, to make them remember the consequences of crossing me. I arrived back at the bar under the cover of darkness, my heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and anticipation. The place was quieter now, the earlier crowd having dispersed, but there were still a few patrons inside. I slipped in through a side entrance, the dim light casting long shadows that danced with the flickering neon signs. With careful precision, I executed my plan. My actions were swift and deliberate, designed to inflict maximum impact without being detected. The scene I orchestrated was a stark reminder of the pain and humiliation I had endured. I made sure that my presence was felt, that the bar's patrons and staff understood the gravity of the situation. The culmination of my plan was a dramatic, high-impact act of vengeance that reverberated through the bar. The chaos I created was a message a loud, unambiguous declaration that the price of betrayal and violence would not be easily forgotten. As I made my exit, the aftermath of my actions left a clear imprint on the bar, a mark of the vengeance that had been set in motion. I knew that the consequences of my actions would extend beyond the bar's walls. The retaliation was not just about personal satisfaction. It was about reclaiming a sense of control and making a statement about the boundaries that had been crossed. The path ahead was uncertain, and the fallout from this dramatic act of revenge would surely come with its own set of challenges. But for now, as I drove away from the scene, the echoes of my retaliation were a bittersweet reminder of the confrontation I had faced and the dark journey that lay ahead. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital's emergency room did little to soothe the throbbing pain that radiated through my battered body. As I lay on the examination table, the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the muted murmur of medical staff seemed like a distant backdrop to the storm of thoughts raging in my mind. My injuries, bruised ribs, a split lip, and a myriad of contusions were a physical testament to the violence I had endured. But the emotional toll was far greater. The night's events had left me not only physically wounded but mentally exhausted, grappling with the betrayal and the need for retribution. The doctors and nurses tended to my injuries with a professional detachment, their focused efficiency a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. The antiseptic smell of the hospital was a bitter reminder of my vulnerability, and every touch, every examination, was a jarring reminder of the confrontation that had shattered my world. As the medical staff worked, I was left alone with my thoughts, the solitude providing a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. I needed to devise a plan, one that would allow me to take control of the situation and secure my future. My first priority was to ensure my belongings and assets were protected. The confrontation with Lisa and her lover had been a violent culmination of a deeper betrayal, and I knew that I needed to act swiftly to safeguard what was rightfully mine. With my injuries being treated, I mentally prepared myself for the next steps. Once discharged, my first move was to visit the house I shared with Lisa. The place that had once been a sanctuary now felt like a battleground. I worked quickly, packing my essentials and securing important documents and valuables. Every item I packed was a reminder of the life we had built together, now being dismantled piece by piece. The process was methodical, driven by a need to protect myself and to prepare for the impending legal battle. I carefully documented everything, ensuring that my actions were above reproach and that I had a clear record of my possessions. The next stage involved deception, a necessary tactic to maintain an upper hand. I crafted a series of strategic moves designed to mislead Lisa and her lover while preparing for the divorce proceedings. I knew that any hint of my intentions could jeopardize my plans, so I took meticulous care to cover my tracks. I changed passwords, created false leads, and ensured that my communications were discreet. The deception was not just about concealment. It was about setting the stage for a clean break and ensuring that my departure was as smooth and advantageous as possible. As the days passed, I focused on the logistical aspects of my departure. I consulted with legal advisors, gathering information on divorce proceedings and preparing for the complexities of asset division. The legal process was daunting, but it was a necessary step in reclaiming control over my life. Each meeting with my attorney brought me a step closer to a resolution, providing a glimmer of hope amidst the wreckage of my personal life. Simultaneously, I began to contemplate my future actions. The aftermath of the confrontation and the subsequent retaliation had left a trail of consequences that I needed to navigate carefully. I contemplated my next moves with a blend of cautious optimism and realistic apprehension. The path to rebuilding my life was fraught with challenges, but it was also an opportunity for a fresh start. I reflected on my goals and aspirations, setting a course for a future that was no longer defined by the pain and betrayal of the past. The process of recovery, both physical and emotional, was slow and arduous. Each day brought new challenges, but it also brought moments of clarity and resolve. As I moved through this tumultuous period, I reminded myself that this was a transitional phase, a necessary prelude to the next chapter of my life. The hospital had been a place of healing, but it was also a launchpad for the decisions and actions that would shape my future. With each passing day, I grew more resolute in my determination to reclaim my life. The pain of the confrontation and the betrayal was still fresh, but I was learning to channel that pain into a driving force for change. The road ahead was uncertain, and the journey was fraught with potential obstacles, but I was prepared to face them with newfound strength and purpose. The hospital was just the beginning. The real challenge lay in the execution of my plans and the careful navigation of the complexities that awaited. As I prepared to leave the hospital and step back into the world, I carried with me a clear vision of the future I sought. A future that would no longer be overshadowed by betrayal and violence, but one that would be defined by resilience and the pursuit of a new beginning. In the dim solitude of my apartment, the weight of the past few days hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of antiseptic from my recent hospital visit. I needed to regain control, to fortify myself against the dangers that now seemed to lurk in every shadow. With meticulous precision, I reached for the gun I had kept hidden for years, an old but reliable piece that had once been a symbol of safety and now represented a new, darker resolve. The gun was heavy in my hand, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of my previous life. I set it on the table and began to load it with powerful rounds, each cartridge a reminder of the gravity of my situation. The act of preparing the weapon was both a physical and psychological preparation for the defensive stance I was about to take. Each click of the magazine and chambering of the rounds was a step toward reclaiming my sense of agency and ensuring my safety in a world that had suddenly become perilous. As I methodically loaded the ammunition, my thoughts drifted to the events that had led me here. The confrontation at the bar, the brutal beatings, the betrayal by Lisa. The pain and betrayal were still raw, but they had crystallized into a focused determination. I reflected on the revenge that had fueled my actions and the need to protect myself from the potential fallout. The gun, once a mere precaution, was now an essential part of my strategy, a tool of defense and a symbol of my readiness to confront any threat. I checked the gun's condition with a practiced eye, ensuring that it was in perfect working order. The powerful rounds I had selected were meant to offer maximum protection, a necessary measure given the aggressive encounters I had faced. Each bullet was a calculated choice, designed to provide both deterrence and defense. My resolve to carry the gun everywhere was unwavering. It was no longer a question of if, but when I might need it. The sense of vulnerability that had plagued me after the confrontation was now countered by the reassurance of being armed and ready. My preparation extended beyond merely carrying the gun. I meticulously planned how to integrate it into my daily life without drawing unnecessary attention. I practiced drawing and handling the weapon with precision, honing my skills to ensure that, if confronted, I could act swiftly and decisively. The routine of handling the gun became a ritual, a constant reminder of the stakes involved and the need for vigilance. As I strapped on a concealed holster, I reflected on the broader implications of my actions. The pursuit of revenge had shifted from a reactive impulse to a calculated strategy. My need for vengeance was tempered by the understanding that my actions needed to be measured and purposeful. I was no longer driven solely by anger, but by a strategic resolve to protect myself and secure my future. The reality of carrying a gun was sobering. It was not just about self-defense. It was a constant reminder of the precariousness of my situation. Every time I reached for the gun, I was reminded of the betrayal that had set me on this path and the lengths I was willing to go to rectify it. The gun became a symbol of my readiness to face any threat, to assert my control in a world that had spiraled into chaos. In the quiet moments of reflection, I understood that the pursuit of revenge was a double-edged sword. While the gun provided a sense of security, it also carried the weight of potential consequences. The path I was on was fraught with danger, and the decisions I made would have lasting repercussions. The need for revenge was tempered by the responsibility of using the gun judiciously, ensuring that my actions were both protective and strategic. As I prepared to leave the apartment, the weight of the gun at my side was both reassuring and daunting. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the road to reclaiming control was filled with potential hazards. But the steps I had taken, the preparation, the planning, and the resolve, provided a sense of readiness for whatever lay ahead. The gun was more than a weapon. It was a statement of my commitment to defend myself and to navigate the treacherous path of betrayal and retribution with determination and caution. The oppressive weight of my recent actions had not gone unnoticed. It wasn't long before the bikers, who had been part of the brutal confrontation at the bar, began to tail me. Their presence was marked by the rumble of their engines and the ominous shadow they cast over my daily life. I could feel their eyes on me, their intimidation a constant reminder of the dangers that now lurked around every corner. I had anticipated their potential retribution, but the reality was more unsettling than I had imagined. The biker gang, with their aggressive demeanor and disregard for personal boundaries, became a persistent threat. Their unwanted attention was not just a nuisance but a potential danger that could escalate at any moment. I knew I had to act strategically to protect myself and divert their focus. One evening, as I drove through the city streets, I noticed their distinctive motorcycles trailing me. The sound of their engines was a constant, low growl, a menacing reminder of their presence. My heart raced as I considered my options. The bikers were clearly on my tail, and it was only a matter of time before they made their intentions known. I needed to outsmart them, to create a diversion that would shift their attention away from me. With a surge of determination, I devised a plan to lead them away from my immediate vicinity. I maneuvered my car through the streets, making a series of erratic turns and quick lane changes to shake off the pursuit. My mind raced as I plotted a route that would take me near my wife's house. The plan was to use her residence as a decoy, to lure the bikers away from me and into a different situation. As I approached the familiar street where my wife's house stood, I glanced in the rearview mirror to ensure that the bikers were still following. Their vehicles loomed large, their headlights cutting through the twilight as they maintained their pursuit. I pulled into the driveway of a nearby house, pretending to be parked there temporarily, while I watched the bikers' reaction. Sure enough, they followed my lead and veered off in the direction of my wife's house. The diversion worked, but the anxiety of the situation lingered. I knew that this was a temporary solution, and the bikers' attention would eventually return to me. However, for the moment, I had bought myself some time and space to regroup and plan my next moves. Encounters with law enforcement. The following day, the atmosphere was charged with an uneasy tension, as I was confronted by law enforcement officers at my apartment. They arrived unannounced, their presence a stark reminder of the legal and personal complications that were rapidly accumulating. The officers' serious expressions and probing questions signaled the gravity of the situation. Their visit was prompted by a vandalism incident reported at my wife's house, the very house I had led the bikers to. The sight of damaged property and the lingering suspicion of malicious intent had drawn the attention of law enforcement. They questioned me about my whereabouts during the incident, probing for any connection between me and the vandalism. The interrogation was intense, and I could feel the weight of their scrutiny. They were meticulous, their questions aimed at uncovering any link between me and the recent unrest. I had to tread carefully, my responses measured and cautious. The risk of incriminating myself or appearing suspicious was ever present. I provided a carefully constructed alibi, detailing my actions and whereabouts with precision. I emphasized that I had been away from the scene of the vandalism, sticking to the narrative that I had been dealing with personal matters unrelated to the incident. Despite my efforts, I could sense the lingering suspicion in their demeanor. As the law enforcement officers left, I was left with a sense of unease. Their investigation was far from over, and I knew that I had to remain vigilant. The encounter had highlighted the precarious balance I needed to maintain, one where I had to protect myself from both external threats and legal repercussions. The situation was a reminder that my actions were under scrutiny, and I had to navigate the complex web of threats and suspicions with utmost care. The encounter with law enforcement was a sobering experience, underscoring the legal and personal challenges I faced. It was clear that the repercussions of my actions were far-reaching, affecting not only my immediate safety, but also my legal standing. As I prepared to continue with my plans, I knew that I had to stay one step ahead, managing both the physical and legal threats that loomed on the horizon. The night had fallen like a shroud, and the city streets were cast in a cloak of darkness, broken only by the occasional streetlight. I could feel the tension in the air, palpable and oppressive. The bikers were once again on my trail, their engines roaring like distant thunder. This time I was determined to confront them directly, to put an end to their relentless pursuit and assert control over the situation. As I navigated through the city's labyrinthine streets, I took a calculated approach, guiding my car toward an isolated alley that seemed like the perfect battleground. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the stakes at hand. I pulled into the alley, the dim light casting long shadows against the brick walls. I knew this was the moment of confrontation, and there was no turning back. I could hear the roar of the bikers' engines growing louder as they approached. Their motorcycles burst into view, headlights cutting through the darkness as they lined up at the alley's entrance. The bikers were clad in leather, their faces hidden behind dark visors, their body language exuding aggression and defiance. With grim determination, I stepped out of my car, my hand instinctively moving to the gun strapped at my side. I had anticipated this moment, prepared for the confrontation with a mixture of intimidation and defensive readiness. The bikers dismounted, their movements deliberate, their eyes locked on me with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. "All right, this ends now," I declared, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The bikers' leader, a towering figure with a scowl etched on his face, took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. "You think you can just waltz in here and threaten us?" the leader growled, his voice dripping with menace. The tension was palpable, the air charged with the promise of violence. I responded with a firm stance, my gun half drawn but still holstered. "I'm not here to negotiate, I'm here to make it clear that you need to back off. I won't hesitate to defend myself." The leader's eyes narrowed, and in a sudden burst of movement, he lunged toward me. The alley erupted into chaos as the bikers advanced, their aggressive actions forcing me into a defensive posture. I drew my gun, the cold metal a reassuring weight in my hand. The sight of the weapon caused momentary hesitation among the bikers, but their aggression quickly overpowered their caution. I fired a warning shot into the air, the loud bang echoing through the alley. The bikers momentarily recoiled, but their aggression was far from quelled. The confrontation turned into a violent skirmish, a brutal clash of fists, kicks, and retaliatory gunshots. I moved with a blend of precision and desperation, using the gun and my training to fend off the bikers. Despite my best efforts, the confrontation took its toll. The fight was chaotic, with multiple bikers surrounding me, their blows landing with painful accuracy. I fought back fiercely, but the numbers were against me. My focus was on self-defense, on pushing through the pain to protect myself from the escalating violence. As the last biker retreated, nursing his injuries, I stood in the alley, breathing heavily and surveying the damage. The confrontation had left me bruised and battered, but it had also served as a stark message. The bikers would think twice before confronting me again, but the cost had been high. Escalating tensions. The aftermath of the confrontation was a bitter reminder of the escalating tension that now defined my life. The bikers had retreated, but their presence lingered like a dark cloud, and their vendetta was far from over. The streets were no longer safe, and every corner seemed to harbor a new threat. As days passed, the sense of danger intensified. I received ominous threats through anonymous messages and phone calls, their content filled with veiled warnings and aggressive demands. The threats were a constant reminder that the violence was not just physical, but psychological, eroding my sense of security. The situation reached a critical point one evening when I was confronted at my apartment. The tranquility of my home had become an illusion. shattered by the sudden, brutal intrusion of violence. I had barely settled in for the night when I heard a series of loud bangs against my front door. My pulse quickened as I moved to investigate, the weight of the gun in my hand a constant reassurance. I peered through the peephole and saw several shadowy figures outside. The bikers, armed and angry, were pounding on the door, their threats and demands echoing through the walls. I knew I had little time to act. The sense of impending danger was palpable, and the confrontation was inevitable. With a deep breath, I prepared for the worst. I positioned myself near the door, ready to respond to any breach. The door shattered in a violent explosion of splinters, and the bikers burst into the apartment, their faces contorted with rage. The ensuing battle was fierce and desperate. I fired my gun with precision, using it to repel the intruders and buy myself time to strategize. The apartment was a battleground, each room a potential refuge or trap. I fought with a combination of tactical defense and raw determination, knowing that my survival depended on my ability to outmaneuver the attackers. The violence reached a crescendo as the bikers attempted to overwhelm me. I was cornered in the living room, the walls closing in with the intensity of the assault. My movements were a blur of defensive maneuvers and retaliatory strikes, each action driven by the primal instinct to survive. As I surveyed the damage and tended to my injuries, I realized that the conflict was far from over. The escalating tensions had reached a new level of intensity, and the battle for control was only beginning. The violence had transformed my life into a relentless struggle, one that demanded resilience and resolve.